we don't fight in sense because we're like best friends. But we didn't know what we were getting into. I'm just trying to do the best for Natalia. Then said that maybe it wasn't the best decision. And maybe it could have been handled differently. Or maybe we could have taken more time to think about it. And it was like, well, I hear you, but I also can't just leave the straw hanging in an abusive situation. So we said, I get that. And I said, you know, can you try to at least put yourself in my shoes? And he said, I did, and that's why I'm here. And he said, I know you're doing it from your heart. He goes, but I realize that you're worried about her. I realize that, and that's the only reason I'm here.
There's been quite a bit of tension for a while now. Coming up to this decision, I was really against it, and I told Nicole that I didn't think it was a good idea, and we have no way of knowing what's going to happen. I told Nicole, it's me or Natalia. I'm angry.
Look, when it comes to Nicole and Vince's marriage, it's amazing that Natalia has caused all of this drama and chaos in yet another household.
By the time 2014 came around, I had no wife, I have no children, I have no home, I have no job. If Natalia never entered our lives, I never did divorce.
It makes you wonder, if a stable family like the DePauls can't figure it out, who can?
This has been really hard on our family. Having another person in our house that we're not used to, that has a lot of emotional baggage coming along with her. I was really against it. I was ready to walk out. It's a difficult situation, but I know, Nikki has a good heart, and she's trying to make Natalia's life better. Nikki and I have been together for a long time.
Vince and I, we both have the same orthopedic surgeon, so that's how we met.
And this is when we were like...
Yeah, we were young. I was like
12, and I was probably 13 or 14.
Eventually I had surgery, and every time I would go, the nurses, they would say, oh my God, you just missed Vince. You just Vince.
We'd always miss each other. We would
like more than once. Like his visit would come and go. He would be discharged, and then I would come. So fast forward to
1991, we were at a Little People convention. We had a mutual friend.
This is my friend Vince, and it's like immediately like a core memory just hit me. And he was a hottie. It was real hottie. And then I just really liked you because he was very shy. I was like, hi.
I guess the rest is history. Ultimately, I decided to stay because I love my wife and I want to stand behind her.
I love you.
Thank you. I love you.
And part of the issue is that, we're really putting in a lot of effort and really trying to help Natalia and get her to make good choices. And it's really frustrating because she is not listening to anything we say.
Matt, can you open the door? Natalia won't let us help her. Why is it like pulling teeth? She's hiding and her walls are up. Stop hiding. And I've told her time and time again that you need therapy. And she said straight to me, you crossed the line. She was pissed.
Yes, I have actually felt a lot of rage towards Nicole. There were some instances that I felt like Nicole was going over a line when it came to me and my parents. And I did get upset because you don't really know my parents that well like I do. There's certain things that I know about them, and there's certain things that I'm learning more about, And Nick and Vince were like they just go tough love on me and be like, look, you need to get into therapy. But I don't like putting my stuff on people. And I know a therapist is that's their job. But I don't like depending on people. I don't like burdening them with my problems. And that's why I hide them all.
Natalia is obstinate. She refuses to get mental health therapy. She's sinking, and we're all going to go down with her. If Natalia refuses to grow, get better, cut ties with the Vanzas, I'm not sure she could stay here. I need to understand Natalia better, and I need to know if there's any hope for positive change. But before I make any decisions, I want to talk to my friend Melissa, because she does specialize in reactive attachment disorder, so she's like the perfect one to help me in this.
My name is Melissa Messigatis. I have my master's degree in rehabilitation psychology. I do work with abuse, neglect cases and children that are ready to be adopted. And so Nicole contacted me just wanting advice, and all I want to do is support her and help her. Yay! Let me give you a hug.
So I wanted to talk to you about, what's going on with Natalia. I feel quite overwhelmed. And I think what's really hard is she's an adult who is basically unsocialized and kind of acts like a child, but you don't want to treat her like a child because she's not a child and she just came from a very controlling environment.
Yeah, it's like you're walking a tightrope.
I mean, I'm not a trauma therapist when she was officially diagnosed with RAD.
Reactive attachment disorder. It's what happens when children don't bond to their caregivers. So we see this a lot with like adoption, international adoption. I'm assuming she was institutionalized. Very young. She didn't get that coddling and nurturing, and that's how your self-worth, your value, that's how that all starts. But when you have abuse and neglect, that's how children often end up with RAD. I think individuals with unaddressed trauma, like Natalia has, these are behaviors that are coming from years of rejection and trauma.
Right.
I still don't understand the full length of reactive attachment disorder, but I know one thing for me is that I don't like being left. I constantly feel like people are just going to walk out of my life. I've had so many people, promise me things like, we love you, or we care about you, or you are our daughter and always will be. And I feel like if I start caring about people or like a certain person a lot, and then they walk away, I'm just going to be a little more broken than I was before. And it's gotten to the point now that, like, if somebody does it, I feel like it's just going to be over. Like, I'm just going to be broke. I personally can't handle someone leaving me anymore. I can't handle caring about somebody and then they walk away.
I think she has to have buy-in to, addressing the trauma and all the horrible things that she's went through. That's a lot to ask for a 20-year-old. I know people that are in their 50s that can barely talk about their trauma. I am concerned for Natalia. I think she needs therapeutic intervention. It can take a lifetime to truly work through all the trauma that Natalia has been through. She's been in survival mode for so long, it does rewire your brain, and it's hard to go back.
Reactive attachment syndrome does not just go away. And, there was allegations in her past that she had been sexually inappropriate with other people, had propositioned men.
She was on the table, and there were a bunch of male patients there, and she was talking to them about being a boyfriend.
That's just crazy. I think I would remember standing up on a table, dancing, taking my clothes off. Is there a video of me actually doing this? Because there's cameras all around that place. It's a hospital where you're watching people that are mentally unstable. You need cameras. Is there a video of this happening? I want visual proof if there is any.
Like, if there is a possibility that I did say sexual comments, I probably heard that from somebody. Because I was really little, and I was at that stage where, like, not understanding what it is, but I want to say it because I heard somebody else say it, so I'm thinking it's okay to say it. The truth is that I feel like I got exposed to sexual stuff at a really young age.
If that's the case, and the Mansons knew about this, they should have 1,000% have been making sure that she had a good trauma therapist, and they did not.
If Natalia doesn't get therapeutic intervention, there's other things that start developing, like personality disorders can come out of untreated RAD. Depression, anxiety, poor social skills, borderline personality disorder can emerge.
Oh, wow.
It's a whole, like, can of worms.
I had no idea that RAD could lead to bipolar disorder, and if that happened to Natalia, that would break my heart. My mother struggled many years with mental health issues. She had bipolar. By the time I got to high school, I couldn't really even live with her. I moved out early. It's very hard now to see somebody else in my life who could possibly now have these same issues. I don't want that for Natalia. She already has enough problems. Good Lord.
My advice to you is this is going to be a long road. And you're going to need to have the patience of a saint, and it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
But you also have to take care of your family and yourself as well. What if this is as good as it gets? What is your breaking point?
I very much knew that all the medical neglect could lead to paralysis. But after hearing that if RAD is left untreated, she may become bipolar or mentally ill, I cannot let her leave. Because my mother had bipolar, and I cannot let that happen to Natalia. Maybe I'm not doing this for the 20-year-old Natalia. I'm doing this for the 5-year-old Natalia. I have to believe she's in there begging me not to give up on her. Vince and Matt, they'll have to understand why I'm doing this. They have to.
It's really a daily struggle with Natalia because she requires so much attention. It's essentially like having another teenager in your house again.
Are you okay? You want some Pepto? Oh, you got it.
I think Nicole has always felt guilt. I know I've always felt guilt about not being able to adopt her and her having to go through countless horrible things. I just can't even imagine the trauma that she's had to endure. But, you know, this is the time in her life right now where she's finally free of people that just want to control her and use her. And she's with a family that, you know, wants to help her. And the fact that she's, you know, not trying to make serious change, that's really frustrating.
Vince's patience is really wearing thin. But we do have a common enemy when it comes to Cynthia and Antoine.
I was just looking at Natalia's finances, and I want to talk about how we can handle all this. Mm-hmm. Natalia didn't have an ID when she first moved here, so she had no way to get a bank account, and basically I was forced to become her payee, even though she's 20 years old and totally could take care of her own money. What's unfortunate is the money that she's received from media appearances, she doesn't have any of that.
She signed a W-9. That basically means that she's on the hook for all that money to the government for taxes.
Natalia wants to believe that Cynthia and Antoine love her. I doubt that's the case. It seemed really clear to me that they were just using her for money.
Seems pretty clear to me that Natalia was duped by the Mansons, right? Because she does turn over her money to them. She's completely in the dark about any taxes she may owe. She does not understand the effect that this additional income is going to have on her government benefits. And basically, she's seeing very little of the money. The bulk of it went to Cynthia and Antoine, and they bought a house with it. So when tax season rolls around, who's stuck paying the bill for the money the Manses tricked Natalia out of? Natalia.
I don't file taxes, you guys. I don't have a reason to file.
What the Manses are doing to Natalia is unconscionable. They should not be able to get away with it.
I told Vince, first just cut the middleman out, and I just told Cynthia myself. She normally never answers, but this time, lo and behold, she actually answered.
Hello?
Hi, is this Cynthia?
Yes.
Time for the gloves to come off. Hi, this is Nicole DePaul.
Oh, hi. Yes.
Did you get the 1099 that Natalia signed for the taxes? Because she needs that document.
Also, she indicated that you were going to pay that tax bill, so.
No, that's not what was said. What was said was we told her we would go in on it because it was our money. Well, we never said we would pay that whole thing. That devil's a liar. We're not paying that whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no.
So you haven't. Do you what you think she should pay for, even though she doesn't have any of that money of the $104,000 you guys received? Yeah. Months before tax season, Vince and I both had a conversation with Natalia, and we made it clear that the government will come a knocking for the tax money. The Manses told Natalia they were going to work with her and help her pay the tax bill, and she believed them. I didn't believe them. My husband didn't believe them. She definitely needs a reality check. So now it's time to tell Natalia the truth. The Manses are going to cost her her benefits, and Social Security is going to come after her. I'm going to try to see if she'll open her door. This is ridiculous. I just want to talk to you for a second.
I'm really stressed out.
She said she was not paying that bill. You want to get her on the phone? She's going to stick you with that bill. And why are you covering for her? Don't you care that they're going to take you down with them, that you're going to get a tax bill for money you didn't even get? Don't you care? I don't understand why you're protecting them so much.
I'm not protecting them.
But you just said this is between me and my mom. Yes.
This started with them.
Yeah, I know that. But it ended with me here, and you, like, having to flee from a church. And then you're acting like they're saints. Which, yes, they took you in, sweetheart, but not everybody's perfect, and you just have to accept that. And then we have to move forward, and we have to figure out what we're going to do, because you're going to get a tax bill soon. I'm not even joking. She just told me, oh, honey, that is not what we decided. Something about the devil. And I'm not joking. She said that is not. And I said, well, why does Natalia have to pay that? You think Natalia has to pay that? Who's going to pay that? Because she didn't get the money. And she hung up on me.
I understand Nicole trying to protect you. I know it comes from a place of protection and motherly love, because I know, like, she is like my second mother. But I have trust issues because of everything that I've gone through. Sometimes I literally have to fight to, like, not cry. Like, that's how overwhelmed I get. Once I get uncomfortable, my anxiety really kicks up, and I'm just like, no. Like, I feel like I'm, like, hyperventilating a little bit. Like, I mean, I'm still healing. Like, there's still a lot of stuff that I'm still working through.
I'm throwing you a light vest. Please, pick a boat. You're picking the wrong one.
Natalia is refusing to see the truth, and we can't do this game anymore. It's just becoming way too dangerous for us.
I'll leave you.
You know, if she won't let us help her, what's the point of all this?
I don't know what to do. I keep having to repeat to myself that Melissa told me that this just is going to take patience and time. But I mean, I'll never give up on her. I'll keep trying to help her. But I don't know how much more I can do. You know, you could lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. But really, I'm worried that if Natalia doesn't show some progress soon, we're going to be forced to make some hard decisions. We're running out of hope.
Mitch and Nicole seem to be at a crossroads with Natalia. Natalia has a tax bill, and she does not seem to want to hold the Manses accountable. But if Natalia can show some progress, any progress, and just stand up for herself, that could really help the DePauls stick with her.
And then something crazy happened that you would not believe. A couple days later, Natalia said, well, I'm going to make sure my parents are going to help me pay it. So she then went to her room, and I went about my business. I went to the bathroom in the back of my house. As I'm walking back, I can hear Cynthia's voice because it's always aggressive and it's always yelling. I didn't hang around because, to be honest with you, I'm so tired of the drama. So I'm doing the dishes or whatever. I'm doing something, and she comes in, sits down at the table. She's all pissed off. And I said, what happened?
I'm so pissed right now. I'm so pissed right now.
Even though they told me they were going to pay it, they're not paying it. I hate them. And I go, they're not going to pay the taxes? No. They're not going to even help you pay the taxes? No.
No, I'm pissed at them. That's the blood and anxiety they shouldn't do. Because people don't think of this.
That was really gratifying. And they made me deposit statement and we got very anxious all night. Oh my. Yeah, but I could not get you can do because there's no way. And how are you going to prove that you didn't pull that money out? But they pulled it in cash, didn't they? I told her, I read those statements and I mean, you know what? They protected themselves over you. If you get cut off, you know what they need to do? They need to sell that trailer to give you money. How dare them? You didn't even get any of that money. I told you that. If you get punished for money that you didn't get, how is that fair? You know what you did? Telling us. Maybe this is God's way of saying that you could move to the UK. Yeah.
It seems like it's dawning on Natalia that the Manses are not going to really help her out. Natalia is finally realizing who the Manses really are and that they really did screw her over. But will Natalia finally do something about it and cut ties with the Manses for good?
Is there a way that you could get hold of that way that this supplemental needs trust account thing?
Yeah.
When Natalia first arrived, she was really, really closed off. She was really still focused on the Mans and really still defending them. So it's really great seeing Natalia turn the corner. Seems like she's finally starting to grasp how the Manses used her. And I think that's showing that she's actually starting to listen to us. This is all starting to pay off.
I'm done trying to, trust people enough to see if they will actually do right. I'm just done. She will never know my kids. She will not know anything that goes on in my life. She won't even know that I have my surgery whenever I get it. She's not. I'm done.
Wow. I almost fell to the floor. After all these months of resisting surgery, her changing her mind, saying she wants to have surgery, this is a huge breakthrough with Natalia. I'm still terrified of surgery.
But after meeting the DePauls and everything and seeing how they are and how their backs are straight and hearing about the doctor that did it for them, I'm starting to be a little more open. I always thought that doing the surgery, I might be paralyzed. But then I learned if you don't get the surgery at all, you could still go paralyzed. I get a lot of shooting pains from my hips and my knees. Like, just like the whole spine, like even my neck, it hurts a lot because like it feels like I'm like there's just so much pressure. And I do want my back straight. I want to take away the pain. And like no matter how much medicine you take or anything, sometimes that stuff doesn't help.
I am just really ecstatic to hear Natalia talking about even contemplating having surgery and her having an open mind to it. It's totally different than where we were just 5 or 6 months ago.
I'm done. And I told her that, and she's like, oh, that's not something you do when I hung up.
At some point, I really think she's going to get the mental health therapy that she needs to. Vince and I hired an attorney to protect Natalia from any legal jeopardy that the Manses had put her in, and ultimately to get her money back.
Natalia does not want to be talked about on any of my platforms, so I'm trying to be respectful of that, so if you guys can please respect that.
I'm not really talking to my parents. I'm living my life, they're living theirs.
You see, she blocks me on everything. I'm like, maybe she'll call today, maybe she'll call tomorrow, but she doesn't, and she blocks me on her phone, her social media is like a knife in my heart. It's almost like mourning a death, you know?
But things got better. Neil invited Natalia to come visit. So before she went to the UK, she got her hair cut.
Just below the shoulder, literally just below. I got you, girlfriend. I got you.
Look at it.
I got my ears pierced. It's been about, I think I've had this for about a week now. She got her nails done. And from an instant, yes, don't agree with it because it's self-mutilation. Like, with jewelry and makeup, in the Bible, women wore makeup to seduce men or, you know, be lustful and things. But I'm just exploring. Before Natalia was able to leave to the UK, we had to hire an immigration attorney to help her get her paperwork for her identification and her passport. So when that immigration attorney got involved, the Homeland Security and the federal government said, people in Indiana, we don't know what you people are doing or what earth you're living on because this girl was born in 2003 and guess what? We're changing her birthday back, but her naturalization papers are in 2003. So Barnett can go suck it. And the Manses too, because all you did was take her money and did nothing for her. Everybody can stake it because Natalia is going to be the winner in this. This is my girl right here. I am so excited for you. Look at that smile. When it's time to leave for England, Natalia was so excited. This is her first memory of being on an airplane, and she had no idea what to expect. You know, so I just hope, like, she has a great trip. By the time Natalia came back, she was a much happier person. Natalia told me that Neil opened her eyes to so many things. I mean, the guy is legit. Like, he legit cares. I love traveling, just, like, seeing new places and new things, and I have a lot of places I would love to go. While she was gone, it was really cool, because Vince and I got to spend some private honeymoon time together. And we don't have to worry about wearing clothes. Just kidding. But, no, I'm actually not kidding. We're making
A beautiful spaghetti marinara. People, maybe I both know her.
Things with Natalia are definitely getting better. We feel like she's a part of the family, and I feel like I have a sister again.
It makes me so happy to see her happy. We're relieved. Thank God.
Lord, we thank you for another day, God. We thank you for this food. We are thankful that we are here together today.
Amen. Amen.
That was really, really good.
In 2009, when the adoption fell apart, never in my wildest dreams would I have imagined this. It feels like my family's complete now. I love it. What about you? I feel like I got my big sister back. Even through all the ups and downs, we still love her, and we want her to do well.
I really am thankful for everything that you guys have done for me. I'm thankful that you two kind of get me. You guys have been really good and looking out and everything like that, and I'm very thankful.
When Natalia was gone in the UK, we missed her so much, and that's how we know that we're a family. Life is messy. I mean, love is messy. It's hard. It takes work. But love is looking around the table and seeing that everyone is still there. And we're going to make it work.
Life ain't easy. That's one thing I've learned early. But there is still some good in the world. It's rare to find the right people. It's rare to find the right place. And even though I've moved to a whole lot of places, coming here was my choice.
After everything Natalia has been through, all the suffering, all the betrayal, and all the abuse, for Natalia to say there's good people in this world, she's amazing.
I'm thankful and ready for the old chapter of my life to be closed.
Yeah.
And just a new one start. We are driving down into New York City, and we are going to a People Magazine interview. I've never been here before. This is awesome. I love this. Now I understand why they call it the city that never sleeps. When People Magazine reached out, I literally looked at Nicole and was like, "You said what?" And she's like, "People Magazine." I'm like, huh? Like, I was just completely stunned. I'm nervous, but I can't wait. It's just crazy, People Magazine News is inviting us down to New York City to do a video.
I grew up on Times Square.
Well, here we go. Wow.
This feels like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I'm really just trying to take control of my life and stop letting other people control it. I feel like I'm becoming this new person, this new version of myself that feels amazing, feels free. Before, when I was really, really little, I was painted as like this murder massacre, with the Barnett and everything like that, just running wild with she's a sociopath.
How crazy is it that, everything that you've gone through over the last 10, 15 years?
This was definitely something I did not think was in my future.
Christy Burnett is not getting this treatment. Sorry, not sorry.
Now I want to take control, grab a hold of my life and steer it where I want to go.
What does it mean to you to be undercover of People Magazine?
It means a lot. Like, this is a once in a lifetime thing, and it's just, I feel like just people being able to see the story and encourage them to know that they can do whatever they want. They can do whatever they want when they put their minds to it. It's an amazing feeling to know that my stories it inspires people. They feel braver and stronger, just from seeing what I went through and how someone, even with my disabilities, you can do anything you put your mind to. You can get through anything that life throws at you. At the end of the day, something good happens from it. Like, it's time to rewrite my story.
I never in a million years imagined the journey that this story would take me on. I mean, for over a decade, the mysteries of Natalia Grace puzzled so many investigators and captivated millions.
Now a story making headlines around the world.
Curious case of Natalia Grace.
It is shocking. Was Natalia a child or an adult?
But I have a theory, and I've been hiding it.
This is recently dedicated to be an adult.
Is it true? Is it not?
Her DNA has all the answers.
Was Natalia a sociopathic, dangerous villain?
Having Natalia live by you is like a Hitchcock movie. We have no denial.
It's gonna kill everybody. She's evil.
Like a serial killer.
Or was she actually a misunderstood, abused victim?
There were all these pieces to a puzzle that we didn't quite put together.
Got a clown artist on our hands here.
You don't know that there's 100% one villain here.
Do I look like a monster to you?
Throughout this whole saga, we tried to separate the truth from the lies.
The story just got crazier.
Just when you think you have it solved, you find out you don't.
It wasn't always easy to figure out who we could trust.
Where there's smoke, there's fire.
That was the broke my heart the most. She act like a monster.
That's not love. That's hate.
So I cannot see all the workers.
We were all abused. We were all abused.
Look, here's what was always clear. Natalia was an orphaned little person from Ukraine, passed from family to family. First, the Chiccones brought her to America, then the Barnetts adopted Natalia and tried to fool the world by turning her into an adult.
They signed paperwork and dropped missing names.
They even seemed to be sexualizing her and possibly pimping her out.
Christine tried to set me up with Natalia.
Then the man just did the complete opposite, controlling her like a child, even when she became a legal adult.
We gotta cut the internet off. We can't allow this to happen.
The man just pretended to be giving Natalia the perfect life.
Behind closed doors, they're monsters. I thought Antoine beat Natalia. I could distill all the hurt and hatred she's been through.
You know, it's almost like people have always tried to turn Natalia into something she's not, instead of trying to understand who she really is.
I was never in y'all's room looking nice.
You're going to kill her.
But look, Natalia fought to speak her truth.
Can you know that she's a victim?
We're not getting into that subject.
And she bravely faced her past.
Just looking at the front of the house, I just remember what happened in there.
I would call Natalia Grace a survivor.
I didn't have a normal childhood. I had my childhood. And so that's like part of the reason I've always doubted myself. What do I do? Like, what can I do? And now it feels like, I left the nest to explore. It feels really good to know that, I can actually do this.
So finally, the puzzle is complete. Maybe now, this curse on Natalia in the household that Natalia has entered over the years. It's broken. The DePauls have broken it by being a loving, stable home. They see the real Natalia Grace.
I want to stay. This is all we've ever wanted for her. Natalia's life as she wants to live it. Besides having my own daughter, rescuing Natalia is one of the most proudest moments of my life, and I would never, ever, ever change a moment of it. Would I do it all over again? Hell yeah! It was worth it. I left the nest. I opened my wings and I soared.
The phone rang just after dawn, cutting through the coastal fog like a blade, and by the time the first patrol car pulled to the curb, the neighborhood already knew something was wrong, because silence has a sound when it breaks, and on that cold California morning in 1996. The silence outside the small blue house on Alder Street was screaming. The front door stood half open, not forced, not broken, just ajar enough to feel deliberate, as if someone had left in a hurry but not in panic, as if they expected to return. Inside, the air was heavy, unmoving, carrying the faint metallic trace that seasoned officers recognize instantly, the smell that turns a routine call into a crime scene, the smell that settles into walls and never truly leaves. On the living room floor, beneath a family photo crooked on the wall, lay the beginning of what would become one of California's most haunting cold case mysteries, a story that would refuse to stay buried, a story that would linger in police files, dinner table conversations, and sleepless nights for decades. Her name was spoken softly at first, almost as if saying it too loudly might make the reality solidify. 27 years old. Local. Known. The kind of person whose face was familiar even to strangers, whose routines were predictable enough to feel safe. She worked a regular job, waved to neighbors, paid her bills on time. There was nothing about her life that suggested danger, nothing that hinted at an ending like this. No signs of a struggle in the room, no overturned furniture, no shattered glass. Just her body, positioned in a way that made detectives exchange glances they would later deny remembering, a stillness that felt staged, unnatural, wrong. The clock on the wall had stopped sometime during the night, its ticking silenced at 2:17 a.m., a detail noted in passing, filed away, forgotten, and then remembered again years later when it would take on a weight no one expected. Outside, neighbors gathered behind the yellow tape, wrapped in jackets, clutching coffee mugs, whispering questions they didn't want answered. Who would do this? How could this happen here? This doesn't happen on Alder Street. The reporters arrived quickly, cameras low at first, then bolder as the hours passed, capturing images that would replay on local news for days, the flashing lights, the evidence markers, the coroner's van pulling away as the fog finally began to lift, revealing a clear blue sky that felt cruel in its normalcy. By noon, the words, "cold case," were already being whispered, not officially, not yet, but in the tone of the officers, in the careful language of the first press statement, in the way no one could explain why there were no clear answers. Detectives moved methodically through the house, photographing every surface, bagging every item that felt even slightly out of place. A coffee mug in the sink. A jacket draped over a chair. A purse resting on the kitchen counter, wallet inside, cash untouched. Keys still hanging by the door. Nothing stolen. Nothing missing. No sign of forced entry. The initial assessment raised a question that would echo for years. If this wasn't a robbery, and it wasn't random, then it was personal. But personal didn't automatically mean obvious. Personal could hide behind familiarity, behind routine, behind the kind of trust that never triggers alarm bells until it's too late. They canvassed the street, knocking on doors, asking the same questions again and again. Did you hear anything? Did you see anyone unusual? Cars passing late at night. Voices. Footsteps. A scream. Most answers were the same. No. Nothing. Just the usual sounds of a quiet neighborhood settling into sleep. One neighbor mentioned a car idling briefly sometime after midnight, but couldn't describe it beyond dark. Another recalled a shadow moving past their window, but admitted it could have been anything. In a place where nothing ever happened, memory blurred quickly, details dissolved, and certainty was a rare commodity. The victim's family arrived in waves, shock etched into their faces, disbelief hardening into grief before the day was over. They stood on the sidewalk, looking at the house as if it belonged to someone else, as if this were a mistake that could still be corrected with the right explanation. Detectives spoke to them gently, carefully, asking questions that felt invasive even as they were necessary. Who was she seeing? Anyone new in her life? Any recent arguments? Any reason someone might want to hurt her? The answers were frustratingly ordinary. No enemies. No threats. No dramatic secrets. Just a normal life, abruptly and violently interrupted. Back at the station, the case file began to take shape, pages filling with reports, photos, diagrams, timelines. The autopsy confirmed what everyone already knew and what no one wanted to say out loud. The time of death narrowed the window to the early morning hours. The cause was clear, but the why was not. Toxicology came back clean. No drugs. No alcohol. No evidence of impairment. She had been alert, aware, alive in those final moments, a fact that would haunt investigators who wondered what she saw, what she realized, and when. Forensic technology in 1996 was competent but limited, and the evidence reflected that reality. There were samples collected, carefully sealed, labeled, stored. Trace materials that hinted at contact, at proximity, at another presence in that room. Hair fibers. Skin cells. Things that meant little on their own but felt important enough not to discard. The lab results trickled in slowly, each one promising clarity and delivering frustration. No immediate matches. No fingerprints in the system. No blood trail leading away from the scene. It was as if the person responsible had stepped in, committed the act, and vanished into the morning light without leaving a footprint. The media pressure intensified as days turned into weeks. Headlines grew sharper, more urgent. Mysterious death shocks quiet California community. No arrests in Alder Street homicide. Family pleads for answers. Tips poured in, dozens at first, then hundreds, then thousands as the story spread. Some were earnest. Others were wild, speculative, fueled by rumor and fear. Every call had to be logged, every lead assessed, no matter how unlikely. Detectives chased down ex-boyfriends, co-workers, neighbors, delivery drivers, anyone whose name appeared even tangentially connected. Each interview ended the same way, with more questions and no arrests. As months passed, the tone shifted. The flashing urgency dulled. News trucks moved on. Other stories replaced this one. The file grew thicker, heavier, harder to carry. The case was still active, officially unsolved, but the energy around it began to fade, replaced by the quiet resignation that defines so many investigations that don't deliver quick answers. Officers were reassigned. Leads dried up. The house on Alder Street was cleaned, repainted, eventually sold, its history disclosed in hushed tones to prospective buyers who nodded politely and said they understood, even as they imagined the walls at night. Inside the department, the case became a reference point, a name spoken with a certain look, a reminder that not every crime yields to persistence alone. Detectives who had worked it from the beginning would occasionally pull the file, flip through the pages, stare at the photographs, and feel the same familiar frustration rise in their chests. There was evidence, they knew it. Something was there. But without the tools to read it properly, it might as well have been invisible ink. Years slipped by. Technology advanced quietly, steadily, in labs far from Alder Street. DNA databases expanded. Testing methods improved. What once required large, pristine samples could now be attempted with fragments, with traces so small they would have been dismissed a decade earlier. Somewhere, sealed in an evidence locker, Those bags collected in 1996 waited patiently, untouched, their significance unrecognized. The case was labeled cold, not officially abandoned but dormant, sleeping under the weight of newer crimes, newer victims, newer demands. And yet, in the community, the memory never fully disappeared. On anniversaries, small mentions appeared in local papers. A brief paragraph. A photo pulled from the archive. Unsolved after 5 years. Unsolved after 10. Each time, the same questions resurfaced. Who did this? Why? How could someone get away with it? The family kept asking. Detectives kept answering the same way. We're still looking. We haven't forgotten. The truth was more complicated. They hadn't forgotten, but they also hadn't found a way forward. By the late 2000s, the file bore the marks of age. Yellowed pages. Outdated terminology. Evidence logs written in handwriting that belonged to officers long retired. New detectives, fresh to the department, would sometimes be assigned to review old cases, to see if modern eyes could catch what earlier ones missed. Most ended the same way, with a quiet sigh and the file returned to its shelf. But occasionally, someone would linger, pausing over a detail, a note, a piece of evidence that seemed to whisper instead of shout. In 1996, no one standing on Alder Street could have imagined how long this story would last, how deeply it would embed itself into the collective memory of a town that preferred its secrets small and manageable. They couldn't have known that the true turning point of the case wouldn't come with a witness or a confession or a dramatic chase, but with a technological leap years away, with a decision made in a quiet evidence room, with a single test ordered almost as an afterthought. For now, all they had was a crime scene, a grieving family, and a question that refused to be answered, a question that hung in the air long after the fog lifted and the tape came down, waiting, patient and unresolved, for the moment when the past would finally collide with the future. The case didn't die all at once, it cooled slowly, like embers buried under ash, still capable of burning if disturbed, and in the years immediately following that morning on Alder Street, detectives disturbed it constantly, turning it over again and again, hoping for heat, hoping for light. They reconstructed the final hours with obsessive care, laying out timelines that stretched minute by minute, tracing movements that might never have happened, asking the same questions until the words lost their meaning. Where was she at 9 p.m.? Who did she speak to at 10? Did anyone see her car after midnight? Phone records were pulled, printed, highlighted, combed through for patterns that weren't there. A short call to a friend earlier in the evening. A voicemail left, casual, unremarkable, the kind you don't listen to twice unless it's the last one you'll ever hear. They walked her life backward, starting at the moment everything ended and retreating step by step into normalcy. The grocery store she visited that afternoon. The cashier who remembered her smile but nothing else. The gas station receipt timestamped just before sunset. Each piece confirmed what they already suspected. There was no obvious deviation, no sudden meeting, no clear invitation to danger. If someone came to her house that night, it was someone she didn't fear, someone she didn't hesitate to let inside, or someone who knew how to enter without leaving a mark. Attention turned inward, toward the people closest to her, because it always does. Friends, co-workers, former partners. Interviews stretched late into the night, conducted in quiet rooms that smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Detectives watched body language, noted pauses, marked contradictions that later dissolved under scrutiny. An ex-boyfriend with an alibi that checked out. A co-worker nursing a quiet crush but no means. A neighbor who waved every morning and locked their door every night. Nothing stuck. Suspicion flared and faded in cycles, leaving behind only fatigue. The forensic reports offered little comfort. Fibers collected from the scene were common, mass-produced, impossible to trace. Hair samples lacked roots, limiting their usefulness with the technology of the time. There was biological material, yes, but not enough, not clean enough, not identifiable enough. The lab results landed on desks like dead weight, heavy with disappointment. Detectives filed them anyway, careful, meticulous, unwilling to throw away anything that might matter someday, even if someday felt abstract, theoretical, almost fictional. As the months dragged on, the emotional toll became visible. Officers who had responded to the scene found themselves replaying it uninvited, the image of the living room floor resurfacing in quiet moments, the stopped clock invading their thoughts at odd hours. 2:17. 2:17. The time became a fixation, a symbol, a point of entry for speculation. Was it accurate? Was it bumped? Did it matter at all? Some swore it meant something. Others dismissed it as coincidence. The debate went nowhere, another loop in an investigation that seemed determined to circle itself. Public interest surged again when a composite sketch was released, based on a vague tip from a witness who claimed to have seen a man near the house that night. The image was generic, unsettling in its ordinariness, and it sparked a wave of calls that overwhelmed the tip line. Everyone knew someone who looked like that. Everyone thought they recognized the face. Detectives chased the most promising leads, only to watch them collapse under verification. The sketch faded from the news cycle, replaced by the next crisis, the next headline, the next shock. Inside the department, the case acquired a kind of mythology. Younger officers heard about it during training, a cautionary tale about patience, about humility, about the limits of certainty. Veterans spoke of it with a shake of the head, a quiet admission that sometimes the bad guys don't get caught, not because they're smarter, but because the timing is wrong, the tools aren't ready, the puzzle pieces refuse to align. The file grew thicker, its spine bowed under the weight of accumulated effort, a physical manifestation of frustration. The family never stopped pushing. They called regularly, asked for updates, demanded meetings, clung to the belief that persistence alone could force a breakthrough. Detectives learned to recognize the sound of their voices on the phone, the mixture of hope and dread that never quite resolved. Each conversation followed the same arc. We're still working it. No major developments. We'll call you if anything changes. The words felt hollow even as they were true, and hanging up never felt like an ending, only a pause before the next inevitable call. Years passed. Officers transferred. Promotions shifted responsibilities. The case changed hands more than once, each new detective bringing fresh eyes, fresh energy, and eventually the same realization that enthusiasm alone couldn't conjure evidence from thin air. They reviewed the interviews, listened to tapes, read reports written by people they'd never met. Sometimes they noticed small inconsistencies, moments that sparked a brief flicker of excitement, only to extinguish under scrutiny. False starts became a pattern, each one more disheartening than the last. Technology marched on outside the confines of the file room. Television shows dramatized crimes with neat conclusions. The public grew accustomed to the idea that DNA could solve anything, that science was infallible, that answers were always waiting if you just looked hard enough. Inside the department, reality was less glamorous. Budgets were tight. Cold cases competed with active investigations for attention and resources. Requests for retesting evidence were weighed carefully, often deferred, sometimes denied. The samples from Alder Street remained sealed, preserved, dormant. Occasionally, a tip would arrive years late, sparked by guilt, intoxication, or a sudden burst of conscience. Someone would call claiming to know what happened, to have overheard a confession, to have pieced it all together in hindsight. Detectives listened patiently, asked questions, followed up. The stories unraveled quickly, collapsing into hearsay, fantasy, or outright fabrication. Each false hope left behind a residue of bitterness, a sense that the truth was being deliberately withheld by the universe itself. The house changed owners again. Children played on the sidewalk where investigators once stood. Life pressed forward, indifferent. But for those who remembered, Alder Street remained charged, a location weighted with unseen history. Neighbors avoided talking about it openly, but newcomers were warned quietly, late at night, over fences and kitchen counters. Something bad happened there. A long time ago. They never caught who did it. The story hardened into legend, stripped of details, defined by absence. Inside an evidence locker, the items collected in 1996 waited in silence. Paper bags. plastic containers. Labels written in fading ink. They were moved once, twice, reorganized as storage systems changed, always accounted for, always intact. No one lingered over them for long. They were relics of an older investigation, reminders of effort expended without reward. And yet, they endured, protected by protocol, preserved by habit, carrying information that no one yet knew how to extract. By the time the case reached its 10th anniversary, the word cold was no longer whispered. It was printed, spoken, acknowledged. A cold case, officially, meaning unsolved, inactive, but not forgotten. A status that offered little comfort to a family still counting years, still marking birthdays, still imagining a different ending. Detectives marked the anniversary with a brief internal review, a gesture more symbolic than practical. No new leads emerged. No revelations surfaced. The file returned to its shelf. What no one could see, not the family, not the detectives, not the community that had learned to live with unanswered questions, was that the case was not finished waiting. It was only waiting for the world to catch up, for science to reach backward through time and pull something forward that had been invisible all along. For now, the mystery remained intact, sealed behind routine and resignation, a story suspended between what was known and what was possible, quietly accumulating years, quietly preparing for a moment that would arrive without warning. When the past would finally speak in a language the present could understand. The first time someone suggested reopening the evidence, it wasn't during a strategy meeting or a high-level review, it was in passing, almost casually. A comment made in the hallway outside the evidence room by a detective who hadn't been on the force in 1996 and therefore wasn't burdened by the same assumptions. He'd been skimming cold case summaries, looking for something, anything, that might respond to a modern approach, and Alder Street lingered in his mind longer than most. No forced entry. No theft. Biological material collected and preserved. The ingredients were familiar, the kind that had fueled breakthroughs in other long-forgotten cases, the kind that turned dusty files into headlines overnight. At first, the idea went nowhere. There were procedures, approvals, budgets to consider. Evidence had to be logged, chain of custody verified, justifications written and rewritten. The case had been cold for years. There was no immediate pressure, no public outcry demanding action. But persistence has a way of working quietly, and over time, the suggestion resurfaced, refined, supported by examples from neighboring jurisdictions where old cases had yielded under new techniques. DNA technology had changed, dramatically, and the gap between what was once impossible and what was now routine had grown wide enough to drive a case through. When the evidence boxes were finally pulled from storage, the moment passed without ceremony. No dramatic music. No sense of destiny. Just a cart rolling down a linoleum hallway, its wheels squeaking faintly, carrying items that had not been touched in years. The labels were checked, compared against logs, signatures verified. Everything was where it was supposed to be, a small miracle in itself. The bags were sealed, intact, their contents unchanged by time, waiting. The lab technicians approached the materials with professional detachment, aware of the expectations but insulated from the emotional weight. To them, it was another submission, another set of samples to process according to protocol. But even they could feel the difference, the subtle gravity that clung to cases like this, the knowledge that these fragments were all that remained of a moment no one could revisit. Swabs were taken carefully, minimally invasive, preserving as much as possible for future attempts if needed. The work was slow, meticulous, quiet. Back at the department, the detectives didn't celebrate. They didn't speculate. Experience had taught them caution. For every success story, there were dozens of attempts that ended in nothing, samples too degraded, profiles too incomplete to matter. They had learned to temper hope, to treat it like a fragile substance that could crack under pressure. Still, the waiting felt different this time, heavier, charged with possibility. Weeks passed. Then months. The lab moved through its queue, cases stacked one behind another, priorities shifting with court deadlines and active investigations. Alder Street waited its turn, a name on a list, a barcode in a system. When the call finally came, it wasn't the dramatic summons of television, just a routine notification that results were ready for review. A detective listened, nodded, took notes, thanked the technician, and hung up without comment. The initial findings were modest but promising. A partial profile. Not enough for a direct match, not yet, but enough to confirm what had been suspected for years: the biological material did not belong to the victim. It was someone else's. Someone who had been close enough, long enough, to leave a trace. That confirmation alone shifted the energy of the case, transforming speculation into something more solid, more dangerous. There was a perpetrator, not a theory, not an abstraction, but a biological presence, captured and catalogued. They uploaded the profile to the database, knowing the odds. Millions of entries, millions of possibilities, and the very real chance that the person they were looking for had never been arrested, never been required to submit DNA, never intersected with the system in a way that would trigger recognition. Days passed without a hit. Then weeks. The database returned silence, an electronic echo of the years that had already passed. But silence didn't mean failure. The profile could be expanded, refined, compared against familial databases, investigative tools that had barely existed when the case began. The process required patience and precision, a willingness to follow threads that might lead nowhere. Analysts worked the data, extracting what they could, building a genetic outline that hinted at ancestry, at relationships, at a network of possibility rather than a single name. As this quiet work unfolded, life outside the department continued uninterrupted. The family aged. Parents grew older. Siblings marked milestones with an empty space that never quite closed. The community shifted and changed, new businesses opening where old ones had closed, new faces replacing old. The case, once a headline, was now a footnote, remembered by some, forgotten by many. And yet, beneath the surface, it was moving again, imperceptibly, like a fault line under pressure. The first real break didn't come as a name. It came as a direction. A cluster of genetic similarities pointing toward a particular lineage, a family tree with branches that extended into California in the right time frame. It wasn't proof. It wasn't even an accusation. It was a suggestion, a map drawn in probabilities rather than facts. But it was more than the case had ever had before. Detectives pored over records, public documents, archives. Birth certificates. Marriage licenses. Old addresses. They traced movements, noted overlaps, looked for connections to Alder Street that might explain opportunity. The work was painstaking, often tedious, punctuated by brief moments of excitement that faded under verification. Many branches ended quickly, disproven by alibis, geography, simple math. But a few remained, stubborn, resistant to elimination. One name surfaced repeatedly, not as a suspect, not yet, but as a point of interest. Someone who fit the age range. Someone who had lived nearby in the mid-90s. Someone whose life intersected with the area in ways that felt uncomfortably coincidental. There was nothing overtly incriminating, no record of violence, no dramatic red flags. Just proximity, timing, and now, a genetic shadow that refused to dissipate. The detectives moved carefully. The last thing they wanted was to contaminate the investigation with assumption or bias. They knew how fragile this stage was, how easily a promising lead could be compromised by haste. Surveillance was discreet. Records were reviewed quietly. Conversations were had off the record, exploratory, designed to gather context rather than confrontation. Each step was weighed, measured against the risk of losing everything they had gained. As the pieces began to align, a tension settled over the case team, a feeling that something irreversible was approaching. For years, the case had existed in a state of suspension, safe in its uncertainty, painful but stable. Now, it was moving towards something concrete, something that could shatter long-held narratives and force the past into the present. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt it. The next decision would change everything. And still, nothing was certain. The DNA profile was partial. The genetic links were inferential. The name that hovered at the center of the web was just that, a name, untested, unproven. The case balanced on a narrow edge between breakthrough and collapse, between revelation and disappointment. The detectives knew this feeling well, the moment when hope sharpens into fear, when the possibility of answers becomes as terrifying as it is exhilarating. For now, they continued in silence, building their case brick by brick, resisting the urge to rush, knowing that one mistake could send the truth slipping back into the dark. The story that had begun on a foggy morning in 1996 was inching forward again, not with sirens or headlines, but with data, patience, and the quiet conviction that even the coldest cases can still bleed, if you press hard enough in the right place. The names sat in the file like a live wire, untouchable until proven safe, and every detective involved understood the danger of moving too fast, of letting momentum turn into tunnel vision. They had seen it before, cases derailed not by lack of evidence but by the wrong certainty at the wrong time. So they slowed down, deliberately, forcing themselves to treat the lead as what it was and nothing more, a possibility. The man lived an unremarkable life, the kind that rarely draws attention. A steady job history. No violent record. A pattern of addresses that placed him in and around the Alder Street area during the mid-90s, close enough to matter, close enough to unsettle. They reconstructed his life the same way they had reconstructed the victims, step by step, year by year. Where he worked in 1996. Who he lived with. How he spent his weekends. Old neighbors were located, some surprised to be contacted after so many years, others reluctant to revisit a time they had neatly boxed away. Memories were hazy, impressions vague. He was quiet. Kept to himself. Polite. Nothing stands out. The phrases repeated with numbing consistency, offering no confirmation and no relief. The detectives mapped his movements against the timeline of the crime, looking for gaps, for moments unaccounted for explanations that felt rehearsed or incomplete. Employment records placed him off work the night of the homicide, a detail that meant nothing on its own but refused to be ignored. Phone records from that era were limited, incomplete, some lost entirely to time. Bank transactions showed nothing unusual. No sudden withdrawals. No unexplained travel. His life, on paper, was aggressively normal. At the same time, analysts continued refining the DNA work, squeezing every possible data point from the partial profile. Each incremental improvement sharpened the genetic picture, strengthening the connection to the same family line. The probability calculations shifted subtly but significantly, the margins narrowing, the room for coincidence shrinking. This wasn't a random alignment. It was converging. The detectives faced a familiar dilemma. To move forward, they would need a direct DNA sample from the man himself. To get that sample, they would need either his consent or a legal justification strong enough to withstand scrutiny. They couldn't knock on his door and ask outright, "Not yet." That kind of confrontation, without sufficient backing, risked alerting him, giving him time to prepare, to lawyer up, to disappear. The case required patience, and patience meant finding a way to collect evidence without revealing intent. They waited for an opportunity, watching quietly as the man went about his routine. He shopped for groceries. He visited family. He drove the same routes day after day. Surveillance reports were dry, uneventful, almost boring, punctuated only by the tension of anticipation. Detectives knew that many cases unraveled at this stage, not because the suspect was innocent, but because the law demanded precision, restraint, a careful balance between urgency and rights. The opportunity came in the most ordinary way. A discarded item. Something touched, used, thrown away without thought. A coffee cup left behind. A cigarette but dropped near a curb. The kind of thing that exists everywhere, invisible until it matters. When it happened, the collection was swift, controlled, executed by the book. The item was bagged, labeled, transported, its chain of custody documented with obsessive care. There was no celebration, no acknowledgement beyond a brief nod. Everyone understood what was at stake. The waiting began again. The sample was sent to the lab, prioritized but not rushed. Results would take time, and time stretched differently now, heavier, denser, every day a test of restraint. The detectives replayed scenarios in their heads, imagining outcomes they refused to voice. A match would change everything. No match would send them back to the beginning, years of work collapsing into a single line on a report. When the call finally came, it was late in the afternoon, the kind of hour when offices empty and hallways grow quiet. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, devoid of drama. The sample had been analyzed. The profile was complete enough for comparison. The result was conclusive. The DNA matched. No one spoke for a moment. There was no cheering, no high fives, no cinematic release of tension. Just a collective stillness as the weight of the confirmation settled in. After decades of questions, after years of uncertainty, the biological evidence had pointed directly at a living person. A man who had walked free for years, who had aged, built a life, blended into the background, while the case gathered dust. The match triggered a cascade of procedure. Supervisors were notified. Prosecutors consulted. Warrants drafted and reviewed. Every step had to be airtight. The age of the case made it both powerful and fragile. Any misstep could unravel everything, handing the defense an opening they would exploit without hesitation. The detectives moved with the care of people carrying something volatile, aware that one wrong move could destroy it. As the plan for an arrest took shape, the emotional reality began to surface. This wasn't just about closing a file. It was about confronting someone with a past they might have believed was safely buried. It was about forcing a reckoning long delayed. The detectives wondered, privately, whether the man suspected this moment might come, whether he had lived with the quiet fear of exposure, or whether he had convinced himself that the past was untouchable. The family was notified in person. The conversation was careful, deliberate, shaped by years of waiting. We have a development. We believe we know who is responsible. There will be an arrest. The words landed unevenly, bringing relief and renewed pain in equal measure. There were tears, questions, disbelief. After so long, certainty felt unreal, almost unwelcome, as if hope had grown too accustomed to disappointment to trust good news. Outside, the world remained unaware. No headlines yet. No flashing cameras. The case that had once dominated local news prepared to re-emerge, not as a mystery, but as a revelation. The detectives understood that once the arrest was made, the story would explode outward, pulling the past into the present with brutal force. For now, they held the knowledge close, moving toward the next step with controlled urgency, aware that the silence surrounding the case was about to shatter, and that nothing about Alder Street would ever feel ordinary again. The arrest came quietly, deliberately stripped of spectacle, as if the department feared that too much noise might crack the fragile truth they had finally uncovered. There were no sirens, no drawn weapons, no neighbors pressed against windows filming on their phones. Just unmarked cars, a calm approach, and a knock on the door that sounded no different from any other knock that had ever come before it. When he opened it, he looked confused, then mildly annoyed, the expression of a man interrupted, not a man confronted by his past. His name was spoken. He was asked to step outside. He complied without resistance, without surprise, as if this moment had always existed somewhere in the back of his mind, waiting for the right hour to arrive. In the interrogation room, the years collapsed inward. The walls were the same pale color they had been in 1996. The table bore the same scratches, the same faint stains. Only the faces across from him were different, younger, carrying the weight of a case that predated their careers. Detectives introduced themselves, explained his rights, outlined why he was there. They watched his eyes carefully as the words DNA and Alder Street entered the conversation. There was a flicker, brief but unmistakable, a tightening around the mouth, a shift in posture that no amount of practiced calm could fully erase. He denied everything at first, flatly, predictably. He said he barely remembered the victim. Said he had never been inside the house. Said there must be some mistake. The detectives let him talk, let the denials stack up, each one carefully noted, each one another layer that would later be peeled back. They didn't argue. They didn't accuse. They presented facts slowly, methodically, allowing the weight of the evidence to do the work for them. The DNA didn't lie. It didn't forget. It didn't care how much time had passed. Hours stretched on. The room grew stale. His confidence eroded in subtle ways, the bravado giving way to defensiveness, then to something closer to resignation. He asked questions he pretended not to care about. How strong is this evidence? How sure are you? What does this mean? Each question revealed more than any answer could. The detectives watched, listened, waited for the moment when the wall would crack. When the confession came, it wasn't dramatic. There were no tears, no full narrative, no cinematic breakdown. It arrived in fragments, incomplete, evasive, shaped to minimize culpability. He admitted being there. Admitted knowing her. Claimed it was an argument, a moment that spiraled out of control. He said he panicked. He said he didn't mean for it to happen. The words felt rehearsed, borrowed from a script written long ago, refined over years of private justification. The detectives took it all in, aware that truth and self-preservation often coexist uneasily in rooms like this. As the hours passed, the scope of the case widened. They pressed him on details only the perpetrator would know. The position of the body. The stopped clock. The lack of forced entry. Each correct answer tightened the net, turning implication into certainty. By the time he was led out of the room, the file that had once been defined by absence now overflowed with confirmation. The cold case was cold no longer. News of the arrest broke the next morning, and the reaction was immediate, explosive. Headlines blared the words that had seemed impossible for so long: California 1996 cold case solved. The community reeled, forced to reconcile the safety they believed in with the reality that someone among them had carried a violent secret for decades. Reporters descended on Alder Street again, cameras capturing a neighborhood older now, changed, but still shadowed by memory. The house stood quietly, unaware that its story had resurfaced. The family faced the news with a complicated mix of relief and grief. Answers had come, but they arrived too late to change what mattered most. Closure proved elusive, an abstract concept that failed to account for the years lost to uncertainty, the birthdays marked without celebration, the questions that had haunted them through sleepless nights. They spoke to the press carefully, emphasizing gratitude for the investigators while struggling to articulate what justice meant after so much time. Inside the department, there was no victory lap. Detectives understood that solving the case was only part of the process. Now came the legal battle, the scrutiny, the inevitable attempts to undermine the evidence. Defense attorneys questioned the chain of custody, the reliability of old samples, the methods used to collect the discarded item. Every decision made over decades would be dissected in court, each one a potential point of failure. The trial loomed, carrying the weight of history with it. Witnesses would be asked to remember events from a lifetime ago. Evidence would be presented that had outlived careers, marriages, entire chapters of life. The passage of time, once the perpetrator's shield, now threatened to complicate the pursuit of accountability. The detectives prepared meticulously, aware that a single inconsistency could tip the balance. As the story unfolded publicly, a broader conversation emerged about cold cases, about the power and limits of forensic science, about the long reach of accountability. Other families reached out, hopeful that their own unresolved stories might someday follow a similar path. The case became a symbol, a testament to persistence, to the idea that time does not erase truth, it only buries it deeper. But for those closest to the investigation, the celebration was muted. They knew that no arrest could undo the harm, that no verdict could restore what had been taken. The solved case closed one chapter while opening another, forcing everyone involved to confront the reality that justice, when delayed, arrives changed, heavier, burdened by years it cannot give back. And as the legal process began to grind forward, one truth remained unmistakable: the past, no matter how carefully hidden, has a way of returning when science finally learns how to listen. The courtroom felt smaller than anyone expected, compressed by anticipation, every bench filled with people who had carried this story in fragments for years and now wanted to see it whole. The defendant sat at the table in a suit that didn't quite fit, older than the man detectives remembered from faded photographs, his hair thinner, his face marked by time rather than remorse. He stared straight ahead as if the room were empty, as if refusing to look might keep the past from fully materializing. Across the aisle, the family gathered quietly, their presence heavy, their eyes fixed not on him but on the space between what was said and what had been lost. The prosecution began by walking the jury backward through time, reconstructing 1996 with careful precision, reminding them of a world before smartphones, before ubiquitous surveillance, before DNA breakthroughs that now felt commonplace. They described the foggy morning on Alder Street, the open door, the absence of forced entry, the stillness that felt deliberate. Each detail was placed deliberately, like stepping stones across a river of years, guiding the jury toward an understanding of how easily a crime could slip beyond reach in that era. The defense responded by attacking the age of the case, framing time itself as the villain. Memories fade. Evidence degrades. Procedures evolve. They suggested contamination, coincidence, over-reliance on science that hadn't existed when the samples were first collected. They painted a picture of an investigation resurrected too late, driven by desperation rather than certainty. It was a familiar strategy, one that leaned heavily on doubt, inviting the jury to believe that the past was too distant to judge fairly. Expert witnesses took the stand, translating complex science into language meant to reassure rather than overwhelm. They explained how the samples had been preserved, how protocols protected against contamination, how modern analysis could extract truth from fragments once considered useless. Charts and diagrams filled screens, lines and numbers mapping relationships invisible to the naked eye. The DNA, they emphasized, was not speculation. It was probability measured to an extreme, coincidence reduced to near impossibility. As testimony unfolded, the emotional rhythm of the trial intensified. Former detectives described the frustration of early years, the leads that went nowhere, the evidence they refused to discard. Lab technicians spoke calmly about their work, insulated from drama, focused on method. The jury listened, eyes moving between faces, absorbing a story that refused to stay neatly in the past. With each witness, the distance between 1996 and the present narrowed, the gap bridged by persistence and technology. When the interrogation footage was played, the room fell silent. The defendant's voice, younger but unmistakable, filled the space, carrying fragments of a confession shaped by self-preservation. Jurors watched his posture shift, his denials soften, his language change. The defense objected to portions, argued context, but the impact lingered. This was not an abstract suspect. This was a man confronted by evidence he could not outrun. Outside the courtroom, media coverage grew relentless. Commentators debated the implications, analysts praised the power of DNA, skeptics warned about precedent. The phrase, cold case, dominated headlines, framed as both triumph and cautionary tale. Families with unresolved losses watched closely, measuring their own hope against the reality unfolding on the evening news. The case had become larger than Alder Street, a symbol projected onto countless unanswered questions. Inside, the family navigated the days carefully, bracing themselves for testimony that reopened wounds they had learned to survive with. Each mention of her name landed differently now, no longer followed by maybe or unknown, but by a narrative that finally named a perpetrator. Still, the ache remained raw, sharpened by the knowledge that answers do not heal in straight lines. Justice, they were learning, is not a moment but a process, and processes are exhausting. The defense called its own experts, challenging the certainty of genetic genealogy, highlighting rare cases of misidentification, emphasizing the dangers of confirmation bias. They questioned the collection of the discarded item, probed the legality, implied overreach. The courtroom became a battleground of interpretation, science versus skepticism, probability versus possibility. The jury took notes, their expressions unreadable, the weight of decision settling slowly, inexorably. As closing arguments approached, tension thickened. The prosecution reminded the jury that the passage of time did not erase responsibility, that advances in science existed precisely to correct the blind spots of the past. They spoke of patience, of evidence waiting decades to be heard. The defense countered with doubt, urging caution, warning against the temptation to rewrite history with modern tools. They asked the jury to consider what certainty really meant after so many years. When deliberations began, the waiting returned, familiar and cruel. Hours passed. Then days. The family sat together, holding hands, bracing for either outcome, knowing that even a guilty verdict would not bring the clean resolution promised by television dramas. Detectives waited too, acutely aware that this final step lay beyond their control. The case that had consumed careers now rested in the hands of strangers. The verdict, when it came, was delivered without flourish. Guilty. The word echoed, final and irrevocable, cutting through decades of uncertainty with a single syllable. Reactions were subdued, restrained by the gravity of what had been decided. The defendant lowered his head. The family exhaled, a collective release that carried no joy, only a fragile sense of completion. Sentencing would follow, more procedures, more statements, more reminders of what could never be restored. But as the courtroom emptied, one truth settled heavily over everyone present: the cold case had reached its legal end, but its emotional aftermath would continue, woven into lives shaped by absence and delay. The story of Alder Street had been rewritten at last, not erased, not redeemed, but finally anchored in accountability, a testament to the long memory of evidence and the quiet, relentless march of time. Sentencing day arrived without drama, stripped of illusion, the kind of proceeding that feels procedural until the words land and reshape everything around them. The defendant stood again, hands folded, listening as years were translated into numbers, as the court measured a life against the weight of a single irreversible act. The sentence was severe, expected, delivered in a voice trained to remain neutral even as it closed the final door. When it was over, there was no gasp, no visible reaction, only a quiet acknowledgement that the state had finished speaking and that nothing more would be asked of him outside the confines of concrete and steel. For the family, the moment was both an ending and a beginning, a line drawn across decades of waiting that did not erase the past but finally defined it. They left the courthouse together, faces drawn, expressions guarded, reporters calling out questions they chose not to answer. Closure remained an elusive word, too neat, too small for something that had stretched across a lifetime. What they felt was closer to release than relief, a loosening of tension they had carried so long it had become part of their posture, their breathing, their sense of self. Inside the department, the case file was officially closed, stamped, archived, transformed from an active investigation into a historical record. Detectives who had worked it across different eras gathered briefly, an informal acknowledgement rather than a celebration. They spoke quietly about what had gone right, what had almost gone wrong, how close the case had come to remaining unsolved forever. There was pride, yes, but it was tempered by the knowledge that success had arrived late and at a cost that could never be recovered. The ripple effect spread outward quickly. Training units incorporated the case into their curriculum, using it to illustrate the evolution of forensic science, the importance of evidence preservation, the dangers of complacency. Young officers listened, absorbing lessons shaped by mistakes they would hopefully never repeat. The story became instructional, its tragedy repurposed as caution, its resolution framed as proof that patience and protocol matter even when progress feels invisible. Beyond law enforcement, the case fueled a broader reckoning with the past. Other cold cases were pulled from shelves, re-examined under the same unforgiving light. Evidence rooms buzzed with renewed purpose, technicians re-evaluating samples once deemed useless, detectives revisiting reports they had learned to live without. Families who had long ago been told there was nothing more to do received calls that reopened wounds and revived hope in equal measure. The solved case on Alder Street had become a catalyst, its impact extending far beyond the people it directly involved. Yet amid this surge of optimism, a quieter truth persisted. Not every case would end this way. Not every sample would speak. Science had limits, and time remained a ruthless adversary. For every success, there would be countless stories still waiting, still unresolved, still defined by absence. The victory on Alder Street did not rewrite those realities, it simply illuminated what was possible when conditions aligned. The community responded in its own subdued way. A small memorial appeared briefly near the house, flowers placed and removed without ceremony, a silent acknowledgement of a chapter finally closed. Neighbors who had lived with the shadow for years spoke cautiously, careful not to sensationalize, careful not to reopen wounds. The street returned to its routines, children playing, cars passing, life asserting itself with quiet insistence. As months passed, media attention faded, the story slipping back into the archive where it belonged. But for those who had lived it, the case lingered, surfacing in unexpected moments, in conversations sparked by headlines about other long unsolved crimes suddenly cracked open by science. The phrase, cold case, carried new weight now, no longer synonymous with hopelessness but with delayed reckoning, with the idea that time, while cruel, is not always final. In private moments, detectives reflected on the thin line between success and failure that had defined the investigation. If evidence had been mishandled. If protocols had been looser. If one decision early on had gone differently. The outcome hinged on choices made by people who could not have known their future significance. The case became a reminder that every detail matters, especially the ones that seem insignificant at the time. For the family, life moved forward cautiously. Anniversaries felt different now, marked not by unanswered questions but by memories reframed in light of truth. They spoke her name without hesitation, without the ache of uncertainty that had once accompanied it. The loss remained profound, unchanged, but it was no longer suspended in mystery. It had an anchor, a narrative that could finally be told without speculation. And somewhere, deep within the system, the evidence that had waited patiently for decades returned to rest, its purpose fulfilled. The samples that once held only potential now held history, a record of how the past had reached forward and demanded to be heard. The case of Alder Street settled into its final form, not as a story of perfect justice, but as a testament to endurance, to the idea that even the quietest traces can one day speak loudly enough to change everything. Time did what it always does after the verdict, it softened the edges without erasing the shape, and as weeks turned into months, the case began to live a different kind of life, no longer urgent, no longer volatile, but persistent in quieter ways. Detectives who had spent years chasing fragments now found themselves thinking about the investigation in hindsight, replaying decisions with the clarity that only comes once the pressure is gone. They remembered how fragile it had all been, how easily one misfiled report or one contaminated sample could have sent the truth back into hiding for another generation. Requests for interviews continued long after the cameras left Alder Street. Journalists wanted retrospectives, true crime producers wanted adaptations, podcast hosts wanted exclusives. Everyone wanted the story, but not everyone understood it. The temptation to simplify was strong, to frame the case as a neat arc from mystery to justice, but those closest to it resisted that version. They knew the truth was messy, layered with luck, restraint, and long stretches of uncertainty that no headline could capture. Inside the department, the case quietly reshaped policy. Evidence handling protocols were reviewed and updated, not because of failure, but because of success. Supervisors pointed to Alder Street as proof that preservation mattered, that today's dead end could be tomorrow's breakthrough. Storage budgets were defended more aggressively. Old cases were logged more carefully. The idea that time could become an ally, not just an enemy, began to take hold. Other jurisdictions took notice. Detectives from across the state reached out, asking questions, comparing notes, looking for parallels in their own unsolved files. Some traveled to observe how the evidence had been preserved, how the genealogical work had been integrated without compromising legal standards. The case became a quiet benchmark, referenced in meetings and conferences, its influence spreading in ways that had nothing to do with headlines and everything to do with practice. For the family, the aftermath was more intimate and more difficult to articulate. Friends assumed that justice meant healing, that answers closed wounds. They learned quickly that grief does not operate on logic. The truth brought relief, yes, but it also sharpened memories, replayed moments with new context, forced them to confront a version of the past that now included a face and a name where there had once been only a void. Some days felt lighter. Others felt heavier than ever. They visited places they had avoided for years, not out of obligation but curiosity, as if retracing familiar ground might now reveal something different. The street. the neighborhood. The ordinary spaces that had once been frozen in time began to thaw, reclaimed slowly, deliberately. There was no ceremony to it, just small decisions made quietly, one step at a time. Meanwhile, the man at the center of it all faded from public view, reduced to a number, a location, a routine defined by walls and schedules. Appeals were filed as expected, arguments recycling doubts already addressed in court. The legal system moved at its own pace, methodical, impersonal. For the detectives, this phase required patience of a different kind, a vigilance against complacency, ensuring that the work they had done remained intact under scrutiny. As the years progressed, the case took on a symbolic quality, invoked whenever discussions turned to the power of forensic science or the ethics of delayed justice. It was cited as proof that accountability could survive time, that the past was not immune to future tools. At the same time, it served as a reminder of what was lost in the waiting, the decades when the truth existed but could not yet be named. In quiet moments, some detectives wondered how the perpetrator had lived with it for so long, whether the memory had faded or sharpened with age, whether the fear of discovery had ever loosened its grip. They would never know. The answers that mattered most had already been extracted, preserved in transcripts and verdicts, leaving speculation to fade into irrelevance. The house on Alder Street changed again, renovated, repainted, its history disclosed in legal language that could never fully capture the weight it once carried. New occupants arrived with their own lives, their own futures, unaware at first of the story embedded in the walls. Life continued, indifferent but resilient, proving that places, like people, can outlast even the darkest chapters. And still, the case lingered in memory, not as a shock, but as a low, steady reminder that some truths move slowly, that justice does not always arrive when it is needed, but sometimes, when it is still possible. The cold case that once defined absence had become something else entirely, a measure of endurance, of patience rewarded not with triumph, but with the quiet certainty that the past, no matter how deeply buried, can be reached. If someone is willing to wait long enough and listen closely enough when it finally speaks. Long after the file was archived and the court transcript settled into digital silence, the case continued to surface in places no one anticipated, threaded into conversations about trust, memory, and the uneasy comfort people take in the idea that time dulls everything. For the detectives, it became a reference point they carried quietly, not something they announced, but something that shaped how they approached every new scene, every new piece of evidence. They handled objects differently now, paused longer over details others might dismiss, because Alder Street had taught them that nothing is truly small, only temporarily unreadable. New cases arrived, loud and urgent, demanding attention with fresh blood and immediate danger. Yet even amid the chaos of the present, the past lingered, whispering caution. Younger officers asked questions not just about what happened, but about how it felt to wait so long, to hold uncertainty without letting it calcify into indifference. The answers were never simple. Waiting, they explained, is not passive. It is an active discipline, a commitment to not discarding what cannot yet be understood. The family's life settled into a new rhythm, one shaped less by anticipation and more by memory. They spoke openly now, telling stories without the hesitation that had once accompanied every sentence, no longer afraid that details might be misinterpreted or used as speculation. Her name re-entered conversations naturally, woven into laughter and quiet moments alike. The loss remained, permanent and sharp, but it was no longer suspended in question marks. It had edges now, painful but defined. They discovered, slowly, that resolution does not arrive as a single moment but as a series of subtle shifts. Sleeping through the night. Passing the house on Alder Street without tightening their grip on the steering wheel. Hearing the phrase, cold case, without feeling their chest constrict. These changes were small, almost invisible from the outside, but to them, they marked progress no verdict could measure. In the wider world, the case inspired renewed faith in systems many had grown cynical about. DNA exonerations and late arrests filled headlines, each one framed as proof that justice, though delayed, was inevitable. Those closest to Alder Street understood the danger of that narrative. They knew how close the truth had come to being lost, how dependent it had been on preservation, funding, and the persistence of individuals who refused to let the file disappear. Inevitability was a myth. This outcome had been earned, not guaranteed. Academic circles dissected the case as well, using it to explore the ethics of genetic genealogy, the balance between privacy and accountability. Debates flared over consent, over the reach of technology into family trees never meant for scrutiny. Alder Street became a case study, its details abstracted into principles and arguments, even as its human cost remained unchanged. The discussion was necessary, complex, unresolved, much like the case once was. For the detectives who had carried it across years, there was a quieter reckoning. Some retired soon after, their careers closing with a resolution few ever receive. Others stayed on, applying lessons learned to cases still unfolding. They shared an unspoken bond, a recognition in each other's eyes that spoke of long nights, dead ends, and the rare privilege of seeing patients rewarded. The case did not define them, but it marked them, a line drawn through their professional lives. The man convicted faded further into obscurity, his appeals exhausting themselves against the same evidence that had finally named him. His story narrowed, reduced to legal summaries and footnotes, stripped of the mystery that once protected him. In the end, he became less interesting than the process that revealed him, a reminder that anonymity is not immunity, only a temporary condition. As years continued to pass, the case lost its urgency in the public imagination, replaced by newer stories, newer shocks. That was as it should be. Closure, when it exists, allows attention to move on. But for those who knew Alder Street before it became a headline, the story remained close, a touchstone they returned to when doubt crept in, when the work felt futile, when patience wore thin. The cold case had taught them something fundamental about time, that it does not heal or conceal on its own, but it creates space. Space for mistakes to be corrected. Space for tools to evolve. Space for truth to wait without disappearing. And in that space, fragile as it is, justice can sometimes take root. Even now, when the street is quiet and the houses glow softly at dusk, there is a sense that something passed through here and left its imprint, not visible, not dramatic, but enduring. A reminder that beneath ordinary surfaces, histories accumulate, waiting not for forgiveness or forgetting, but for the moment when they can finally be understood. Years after the sentence was handed down, after the case stopped being cited in press briefings and training manuals, Alder Street returned to the kind of anonymity it had once taken for granted, the sort that only exists when nothing terrible has happened there recently. Cars parked along the curb overnight without a second thought. Porch lights flicked on and off according to routine, not fear. The street looked ordinary again, and that ordinariness was deceptive, layered over a history that had proven how thin the line really was. For those who remembered, the case lived on not as a story but as a sensation, a tightening in the chest when certain details surfaced, a reflexive pause when they heard about another unsolved crime waiting quietly in an evidence room somewhere. The detectives who remained on the force noticed it in themselves, a shift in instinct that never quite faded. They double-checked seals. They asked one more question. They refused to let impatience dictate decisions. Alder Street had taught them that tomorrow's answers often depend on today's restraint. The evidence itself, once the key to everything, became almost sacred in hindsight, a physical reminder of how close the truth had come to being lost forever. New recruits were shown photographs of the original packaging, the handwritten labels from 1996, the protocols that had protected the samples through moves, budget cuts, and reorganizations. They were told plainly that no one in that room could predict which case would matter decades from now, and that was precisely why all of them mattered equally in the present. Outside law enforcement, the ripple effects continued in quieter ways. Families with long unsolved losses began to ask harder questions, not of detectives, but of time itself. What does it mean to wait? How long is too long? At what point does hope become another form of suffering? Some found comfort in the Alder Street outcome. Others found it cruel, a reminder that answers are unevenly distributed, that persistence does not guarantee reward. The case offered no universal lesson, only the uncomfortable truth that justice is possible, not promised. The family learned to live with that ambiguity. They stopped measuring time in years since the crime and began marking it in smaller, more manageable increments. Seasons. Holidays. Ordinary days that passed without the weight of expectation. They visited her resting place not out of obligation but connection, speaking aloud without rehearsing what they would say, trusting that memory did not require structure to survive. The narrative of her life slowly reclaimed space from the narrative of her death. In moments of reflection, they acknowledged something they rarely said publicly, that the waiting had changed them permanently. The decades of uncertainty had shaped how they loved, how they worried, how they imagined the future. Resolution did not erase that imprint. It simply gave it context. They carried forward a version of themselves forged in absence, tempered by endurance, unwilling to let bitterness define what remained. The legal system, having rendered its judgment, moved on as it always does, cases stacking atop one another in an endless procession. Yet occasionally, a clerk or an attorney would pause over the Alder Street file, reading a line twice, reminded that the past does not expire simply because paperwork does. The case lingered in footnotes, in citations, in the quiet understanding that some victories arrive long after the urgency has faded. As technology continued to evolve, the story gained a different resonance. What else lay dormant, waiting for tools not yet invented? What other names existed only as probability, hovering just beyond reach? The Alder Street case became less about one crime and more about a threshold moment, the point at which the future reached back and altered the meaning of the past. It stood as proof that time is not linear in the way people like to believe, that consequences can echo forward and backward simultaneously. Occasionally, someone would ask the detectives if solving the case felt like closure. The question always landed awkwardly. Closure implied an ending, a clean break, and nothing about Alder Street had ever been clean. What they felt instead was alignment, the sense that the story now matched reality, that the gap between what happened and what was known had finally narrowed enough to breathe. It was not peace, but it was truth, and that mattered more. The street itself remained indifferent, as streets always are. Asphalt cracked and was repaired. Trees grew taller, then were trimmed back. Houses were renovated, repainted, sold. Life pressed forward with a steady insistence that refused to be haunted forever. And yet, beneath that surface, the memory persisted, not as a warning or a spectacle, but as a quiet acknowledgement of what had passed through and been carried away. In the end, the cold case did not resolve into triumph or tragedy alone. It settled into something more complex, a testament to patience without romance, to science without certainty, to justice that arrives altered by delay. Alder Street became a reminder that the past is never truly gone, only waiting, and that when it finally speaks, it does so not with answers that heal everything, but with truths that allow the living to move forward without looking over their shoulder quite so often. Long after the final appeal was denied, long after the courtroom emptied for the last time, the silence surrounding the case changed character. It was no longer the heavy, suffocating quiet of unanswered questions, but something thinner, more deceptive, a silence that pretended to be peace while still vibrating with everything that had happened. People spoke less about the crime, yet thought about it more than they admitted, especially on nights when the air felt too still, when memories had room to resurface without warning. In California, 1996 no longer felt like a year on a calendar. It had become a fault line. Everything before it seemed naive. Everything after it carried a faint trace of vigilance. Parents who had once let doors remain unlocked stopped doing so, not because they remembered the details, but because they remembered the feeling. That low, persistent awareness that something ordinary had once turned catastrophic without announcing itself. The name of the victim was spoken less often in public, but never disappeared. It lived in private rituals, in the way certain songs were skipped, certain routes avoided, certain anniversaries acknowledged without explanation. Her story had fused with the place, with the community's collective memory, becoming inseparable from the landscape itself. Even newcomers, unaware of specifics, sensed it in the pauses that followed casual questions about the street's past. The man convicted carried his own silence, one that hardened with time. In prison interviews, he rarely spoke of the crime, offering neither confession nor remorse in any language that mattered. His DNA had spoken for him, precise and unyielding, stripping away decades of denial with a certainty no argument could dismantle. What remained was a human figure reduced to facts, existing as proof rather than mystery, an ending that felt almost anticlimactic after so many years of doubt. Investigators, now older, sometimes revisited the case privately, not out of obligation, but compulsion. They replayed early decisions in their minds, wondered what might have changed if technology had arrived sooner, or if intuition had been trusted more deeply. These reflections never settled into regret. They existed as reminders of limitation, of the fragile balance between human judgment and the tools available at the time. For the community, the solved cold case became a paradox. It reassured and unsettled in equal measure. If justice could arrive after decades, then perhaps no crime was ever truly buried. But that same thought carried a darker implication, that certainty could remain dormant, invisible, waiting silently while life unfolded unaware. The idea lingered, uncomfortable but undeniable. The story no longer belonged to headlines or documentaries. It belonged to the spaces between them, to the unspoken understanding that some truths do not bring relief, only alignment. The crime had been named. The responsibility assigned. Yet the emotional weight did not dissolve. It redistributed itself, spreading thinner, embedding deeper, becoming part of the background hum of everyday life. On Alder Street, the house where it began no longer attracted attention. Curtains changed. Gardens were replanted. Children who had not been born when the crime occurred played on sidewalks without knowing why older residents watched them just a second longer than necessary. Time had softened the edges, but it had not erased the outline. The cold case, once a wound, became a scar. Visible only to those who knew where to look, felt only when pressed. It no longer bled, but it never vanished. It stood as evidence of endurance rather than resolution, of a truth that arrived late but refused to be ignored once it did. And so the story ends without fanfare, without moral clarity, without the comfort of forgetting. It ends with a community still breathing, still remembering, still carrying forward the knowledge that the past does not stay silent forever. Somewhere, in an evidence room or a memory, a single fragment waits patiently, reminding anyone willing to listen that time does not erase crime, it only decides when the answer is allowed to surface. What remains, after everything has been said and filed away, is not the verdict or the science or the long arc of procedure, but the way the story still breathes in the margins of ordinary life. It moves quietly now, no longer demanding attention, no longer forcing itself into conversation, yet impossible to fully silence. The cold case has finished speaking in court, but it continues to whisper elsewhere, in places where microphones never reach. There are nights when former investigators wake without knowing why, their minds briefly returning to a detail they once dismissed, a shadow in a photograph, a pause in a statement that felt wrong only in hindsight. These thoughts no longer serve a purpose. They solve nothing. Still, they arrive, uninvited, reminders that the human mind does not retire from unfinished business simply because the law has. The case closed on paper, but it left fingerprints on the people who carried it. The community learned, slowly, that answers do not rewind time. They do not restore the version of the world that existed before suspicion took root. Instead, they reshape memory, forcing everyone to reinterpret the past with new information layered over old beliefs. Conversations that once began with uncertainty now begin with certainty, and yet that certainty brings its own discomfort, a sense that clarity has replaced mystery without offering comfort in return. In quiet moments, people ask themselves whether they truly wanted the case solved, or whether the unanswered question had become a strange form of companionship, something constant in an unpredictable world. The solution did not feel like an ending so much as a shift, a reorientation of grief that had learned to live without direction. Knowing the truth did not simplify loss. It complicated it. The passage of time continues, indifferent to narrative weight. New crimes emerge. New investigations begin. Technology advances again, promising faster answers, sharper precision, fewer years lost to waiting. Yet the Alder Street case resists becoming obsolete. It lingers as a caution not against failure, but against certainty, against the belief that the present holds all necessary tools to understand itself. Somewhere, the evidence still exists, preserved long after its purpose has been fulfilled. It sits in storage as proof of a moment when the future intervened, when progress reached backward and rearranged the meaning of decades. It does not glow or announce its importance. It simply exists, quiet and unassuming, like the truth often does. For the family, life continues in ways that feel almost rebellious. Laughter returns without guilt. Plans are made without hesitation. The absence remains, but it no longer defines every choice. They carry the memory forward not as an open wound, but as a presence integrated into who they have become. The case gave them an answer, but living required something else entirely: permission to move. The cold case, once a headline, now survives as a lesson without instruction. It does not tell anyone what to feel or how to respond. It simply stands as evidence that time is neither enemy nor ally, only a witness, watching patiently as human beings search for meaning inside events that resist it. And in the end, when the noise fades completely, when even the echoes lose their urgency, what remains is the understanding that some stories do not conclude. They recede. They settle into the background of collective memory, shaping perception without demanding attention, reminding those who listen closely that silence is not emptiness, and that even the coldest case leaves behind heat, long after the truth has finally been spoken.